the man who burned his ships. The audacious conquest of Hernán Cortés. Picture this. A failed law student with no military training stands on a beach in Mexico, watching his own ships burn. Behind him, 500 terrified soldiers wonder if their leader has lost his mind. Ahead lies an empire of millions, with cities larger than any in Europe, armies that dwarf his tiny force, and a god-king who believes he's immortal. The year is 1519 and Hernán Cortés has just made the most insane decision in military history, or the most brilliant. What happened next would be so improbable that if you wrote it as fiction, publishers would reject it as unrealistic. The dropout who became a legend. Hernán Cortés wasn't supposed to be a conquistador at all. Born in 1485 in Medellin, Spain, to minor nobility, his parents dreamed he'd become a lawyer. He lasted exactly 2 years at the University of Salamanca before boredom, or perhaps destiny, called him elsewhere. At 19, he should have sailed to the New World, but a romantic escapade gone wrong left him with a broken leg after falling from a wall while visiting a married woman. Even his journey to glory began with humiliation. When Cortés finally reached the Caribbean in 1504, he was nobody. Just another Spanish adventurer seeking gold in Hispaniola, then Cuba. He became a notary, essentially a glorified clerk. For 15 years he languished in bureaucratic obscurity while watching others make their fortunes. But Cortés was watching, learning, and waiting. He understood something crucial. In the New World, audacity mattered more than birthright. The mutiny before the conquest. Here's what most history books gloss over. Cortés's expedition to Mexico was technically illegal from the start. The governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, had given him command of a small exploratory mission, then got cold feet and tried to cancel it. Cortés ignored him and sailed anyway with 11 ships, 500 men, 16 horses and several cannons. He'd essentially stolen the expedition. But why Mexico? Because rumors were swirling of gold, not scattered nuggets but mountains of it, controlled by a sophisticated empire inland. 2 previous Spanish expeditions had been repelled with heavy losses. The message was clear. Something powerful lay beyond that coastline, something worth dying for, or killing for. When Cortés landed near present-day Veracruz in April 1519, he faced an immediate problem. His men were terrified and wanted to return to Cuba. His solution became legendary. He didn't actually burn his ships, that's a myth. He did something cleverer. He had them stripped of useful supplies and then scuttled, making them unusable. Then he told his men the ships had rotted from shipworm. Retreat was no longer an option. They would conquer or die. Imagine the psychology of that moment. Cortés had trapped his own men in a corner where their only option was to fight an empire. It was madness masquerading as strategy. The woman who changed everything. But here's the twist that makes this story truly fascinating. Cortés didn't conquer the Aztecs through military genius alone. His most powerful weapon was a woman named Malinche, known to the Spanish as Doña Marina or La Malinche. She was the enslaved Nahua woman given to Cortés as tribute by a defeated tribe. What made her invaluable? She spoke both Nahuatl, the Aztec language, and Maya, and she quickly learned Spanish. Suddenly, Cortés could communicate, negotiate, and manipulate. But Malinche was more than a translator. She became his strategic advisor, cultural interpreter, and later his lover and mother of his son. Without her, Cortés would have been stumbling blind through a complex political landscape he couldn't comprehend. She explained the tributary system, the resentments of conquered peoples, the protocols of Aztec diplomacy, and, perhaps most crucially, she identified opportunities to exploit the empire's weaknesses. Was she a traitor to her people, or a survivor playing the only hand she'd been dealt? History has judged her harshly, but her story raises uncomfortable questions about agency, survival, and loyalty in impossible circumstances. When gods walk among men. Meanwhile, in Tenochtitlan, Emperor Moctezuma II was having a very bad year. Omens were everywhere: comets, temples spontaneously combusting, mysterious voices wailing in the night. Aztec prophecy spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, returning from the east in the year 1 Reed. The Aztec calendar year 1 Reed corresponded to 1519. Then reports arrived: pale-skinned beings riding enormous deer, horses which didn't exist in the Americas, carrying metal tubes that roared like thunder, had landed on the coast. Some accounts suggest Moctezuma genuinely believed Cortés might be Quetzalcoatl. Others argue he was simply caught in political paralysis, unable to decide whether to treat the Spanish as gods, ambassadors, or invaders. This ambiguity became Cortés's greatest advantage. He didn't have to defeat the Aztecs militarily, not yet. He just had to exploit their confusion and hesitation. The march to the heart of empire. As Cortés marched inland, something remarkable happened. He wasn't conquering, he was recruiting. The Aztec Empire, it turned out, was a pressure cooker of resentment. Dozens of city-states paid tribute to Tenochtitlan through a system maintained more by terror than loyalty. When a small Spanish force allied with the kingdom of Tlaxcala, bitter enemies of the Aztecs, the expedition's numbers swelled to thousands of indigenous warriors. Let's be clear, Cortés didn't conquer the Aztecs with 500 Spaniards. He conquered them with an indigenous army of tens of thousands who saw the Spanish as useful weapons against their Aztec overlords. The conquest of Mexico was, in many ways, a civil war that Cortés merely catalyzed. When Cortés entered Tenochtitlan in November 1519, he found a city of over 200,000 people built on an island in a lake, connected by causeways, with pyramids towering over clean streets and bustling markets. The Spanish were stunned. It was larger and arguably more impressive than any city in Europe. One soldier, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, wrote that they thought they were dreaming. The massacre and the siege. What came next was a masterclass in betrayal and brutality. Cortés, sensing danger, took Moctezuma hostage in his own palace. For months, the conquistador ruled Tenochtitlan through his captive emperor in a surreal puppet show. But when Cortés left to deal with a Spanish force sent to arrest him, remember, his expedition was illegal. His subordinate Pedro de Alvarado panicked during an Aztec religious festival and ordered a massacre of unarmed nobility. The city exploded in rage. When Cortés returned, he was trapped. On the night of June 30th, 1520, La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows, the Spanish attempted to flee across the causeways. Aztec warriors attacked from canoes. Hundreds of Spanish and thousands of indigenous allies drowned in the lake, dragged down by the gold they'd looted. Cortés himself reportedly wept beneath a tree at the disaster. Any reasonable person would have fled Mexico forever. Cortés regrouped, reinforced, and laid siege to Tenochtitlan for 75 days. He built brigantines, small warships, to control the lake. He cut off food and water supplies. The Aztecs fought with stunning courage, but they were battling something more deadly than Spanish steel. Smallpox had arrived, killing thousands, including Moctezuma's successor. On August 13, 1521, the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, surrendered. The city that had awed the Spanish was rubble. The empire had fallen. The aftermath of ambition. Cortés had achieved the impossible, but his reward was bitter. The Spanish crown, fearing his power, stripped him of political authority while giving him wealth and titles that rang hollow. He spent his later years in increasingly desperate attempts to regain favor, even traveling back to Spain to plead his case. He died in 1547, wealthy but marginalized, his greatest triumph already fading into controversy. The conquest's toll was apocalyptic. Within a century, disease, warfare, and exploitation reduced Mexico's indigenous population from an estimated 20 million to barely 1 million. The psychological, cultural, and demographic devastation was so complete that we're still grappling with its consequences today. The uncomfortable legacy. So what do we do with Hernán Cortés? He was brilliant, audacious, and ruthless, a man who saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles, and who possessed the charisma to bend others to his vision. He was also a genocidal conqueror whose actions triggered one of history's greatest catastrophes. The truth is, Cortés's story is viral because it contains every element of human drama: impossible odds, cultural collision, political intrigue, betrayal, romance, and world-changing consequences. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about heroism, destiny, and the price of ambition. His conquest wasn't inevitable. It required a perfect storm of disease, political fracture, technological advantage, indigenous allies, strategic genius, and sheer audacity. Change any one element, and the Aztec Empire might still stand. Instead, we're left with a cautionary tale about what happens when worlds collide, and when one determined individual, armed with more ambition than scruples, decides to burn his ships and bet everything on an impossible dream. Cortés got his place in history, but history itself may never forgive him for what he destroyed to get there.